Have you ever wondered if the choices you make are truly your own, or if they are somehow set in motion by forces far beyond your control? Imagine this. You travel back in time, carrying a book written by none other than yourself. You hand it to an influential figure from history, someone whose works shaped the course of civilization. That figure, inspired by your future work, claims the book as their own and publishes it for the first time. You return to your original timeline, and, to your surprise, the book is now part of history. But here's the catch. You never wrote the book in the first place. The only reason it exists is because you handed it to that historical figure who then created it, only to pass it back to you from the future. You didn't write the book, but you were the one who made it possible. And yet, without you handing it over, it would have never existed. This is the bootstrap paradox, a concept so mind-bending that it forces us to question everything we know about time, causality, and existence itself. The bootstrap paradox revolves around a loop of causality that seems to violate everything we've been taught about time. In simple terms, it describes a situation where an object or piece of information exists without ever having been created because it is passed around in time, creating a closed loop. To put it in perspective, imagine you go back in time and give Shakespeare a copy of his own works, which he then claims as his own. But wait, if Shakespeare never originally wrote those works, who did? The paradox is that the work has no real origin. It simply exists, passed through time, without any clear beginning or creator. This mind-boggling scenario raises questions about the nature of time itself. Can time truly loop back upon itself in such a way that the origin of an object or idea is lost in the endless cycle? Or is this just a failure in our understanding of time's linearity? Now, let's consider what this paradox means for our understanding of free will and causality. We like to think of the world as a place where cause and effect follow a clear linear path. A happens, and then B follows as a result. But what if the events of your life, your very existence, were part of a cycle that has always existed and always will? In the case of the bootstrap paradox, the chain of events you think of as being entirely in your control is, in fact, a loop. An infinite feedback loop where the origin is hidden and everything is merely passed down through time. If everything is predetermined in this way, does it mean we have no real agency over our actions? Are we simply playing out a role written by the forces of time itself? Imagine that you're now caught in the paradox. You receive an invention from your future self, a brilliant new idea that could change the world. But here's the thing. You never truly created this invention because you were given it by your future self, who got it from you in the first place. It seems to exist solely because of this continuous cycle, yet you believe you are the inventor. How can you claim ownership of something that had no true origin? This paradox raises a terrifying question about the very nature of identity. If we cannot even trace the true source of an object or idea, how can we trust our own sense of self? But as unsettling as it may be, the bootstrap paradox forces us to confront the reality that time may not be as linear as we once believed. We have always understood time as moving in one direction, forward. But what if time, like the objects in the bootstrap paradox, loops upon itself, creating endless possibilities and paradoxes that never resolve? Does this mean we live in a reality governed by predetermined events? Or is there a way to break free from this cycle? The answers may never be fully clear, but the very fact that we are even able to entertain such questions points to the deeply paradoxical nature of existence itself. As we begin to close the book on this paradox, we must consider, what if free will doesn't exist in the way we think it does? What if our choices are just echoes of decisions made in another time by a version of ourselves we have yet to meet? The bootstrap paradox, with all its contradictions and mysteries, leaves us with one profound conclusion. What we perceive as the flow of time may just be an illusion, and we may be caught in an endless loop of our own making. So as you try to sleep tonight, remember that time and causality might not be as simple as they appear. Perhaps, like the paradox itself, you're merely a part of a cycle that has no true beginning or end. And if you think this was perplexing, just wait until you hear about the grandfather paradox, where the very existence of your future self is at risk, an even deeper dive into the mysteries of time and causality. Stay tuned. What if someone told you, "I am lying"? Simple, right? But now think about it for a moment. Are they telling the truth or are they lying? If they are telling the truth, then the statement, "I am lying," must be false. But if it's false, then they must be telling the truth. This is the essence of the liar paradox, a self-referential riddle that has baffled philosophers for centuries, forcing us to confront the very nature of truth and deception. In this paradox, we are caught in a loop, an endless cycle where truth and falsehood blur into one inseparable whole, leaving us questioning the foundation of all logic. The liar paradox appears simple at first, but it strikes at the core of how we think about language and truth. When someone says, "I am lying," they are essentially making a statement about their own honesty. If their statement is true, then they are lying. But if they are lying, then the statement must be false, which means they are telling the truth. The paradox creates an infinite loop where one statement contradicts itself endlessly with no resolution. It's a logical puzzle that doesn't seem to have an answer, because once you engage with it, you can't escape the cycle of contradictions. The historical roots of the liar paradox trace back to the ancient Greek philosopher Epimenides, who is famously known for the statement, "All Cretans are liars." If Epimenides, a Cretan himself, is telling the truth, then his statement must be false, because he is a Cretan. But if his statement is false, then not all Cretans are liars, which means he may be telling the truth after all. This paradox not only challenges the idea of truth, but also opens the door to exploring the limits of language itself. Can we trust language to accurately convey reality, or are all statements, especially self-referential ones, flawed by design? The implications of the liar paradox reach beyond logic and philosophy. They influence how we perceive truth in the real world. If language can be self-contradictory, can we ever fully trust what others say? When someone claims to be honest, can we take their word for it? Are we all just trapped in a web of lies, where even the act of speaking the truth is a form of deception? The paradox also raises important questions about the limits of human understanding. If we cannot resolve the liar paradox, what does this say about our ability to comprehend the complexities of reality? Perhaps, like the paradox itself, there are some things we simply cannot know for sure. Now, Imagine for a moment that you are asked to declare whether the statement "I am lying" is true or false. At first, it seems straightforward. If they are lying, then the statement is false. If they are telling the truth, then the statement must be true. But as you try to analyze it, you find yourself caught in a spiral. Both answers contradict each other, and you can't escape the loop. It's as if the paradox has a life of its own, pulling you deeper into confusion. You try to make sense of it, but every attempt only deepens the mystery. Would you find peace in one answer, or would you spiral into endless questioning, forever trapped in the paradox? At the heart of the liar paradox lies a profound contradiction. How can a statement be both true and false at the same time? If a statement can be self-referential in such a way that it contradicts itself, what does this say about our understanding of truth? Does truth become meaningless if it can never be fully pinned down? And if truth is relative, how can we ever be certain of anything? The paradox forces us to confront our assumptions about language, logic, and the very nature of reality. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, our understanding of the world is far more uncertain than we would like to admit. The paradox doesn't just challenge the foundation of logic, it also casts doubt on our perception of reality. We rely on language to communicate and understand the world, yet this paradox shows that even our simplest statements can be deceptive. If language is flawed, then how do we know we are ever truly understanding anything? How can we trust what others say when their statements might be riddled with contradictions? In a world where truth is so elusive, are we ever able to fully grasp the nature of reality? But here's the twist. The liar paradox isn't just about logic or language. It's also a reflection of the uncertainty that defines human existence. Just as we struggle to resolve this paradox, so too do we struggle to understand the deeper truths of life. Perhaps the paradox itself is a metaphor for the human condition. We search for meaning and understanding, but the answers are often elusive, slipping through our fingers like sand. We may never resolve the contradictions of the liar paradox, but perhaps that's part of the beauty of it, the endless questioning, the mystery that keeps us engaged, forever searching for answers. Imagine a reality where, no matter how many times you die, you always wake up in another universe where you survive. Would you ever truly fear death again? This concept, known as quantum immortality, presents a terrifying and intriguing possibility, one where the concept of death is not a finality, but a transition, and you never truly cease to exist. The idea is rooted in quantum mechanics, specifically the many worlds interpretation, which suggests that every possible outcome of an event is realized in a separate, parallel universe. What if you were to die in one universe, but your consciousness shifted to another, where you continue to live? This mind-bending thought experiment leads to the unsettling realization that, in a multiverse, death may not be the end. It could merely be the beginning of yet another version of yourself, continuing to exist in an infinite number of realities. At its core, quantum immortality suggests that, if we take the many worlds interpretation seriously, then every time a life or death decision is made, the universe splits. In one version, you survive, and in another, you perish. But, according to quantum immortality, it's your consciousness that jumps into the version where you survive. This means, in theory, you could never truly die, because your awareness will always follow the path where you continue to exist. In this view, death is not an end, but a shift into a parallel universe where you are alive. In one reality, you might be struck by a car, but in another, you dodge it at the last second. It's not just a single life you are living, but an endless series of lives, all depending on which version of you survives the fateful moments of your existence. This theory challenges the very notion of death as we understand it. In our conventional view, death is final. It is the cessation of consciousness, the end of an individual's life. But if the many worlds theory holds, and your consciousness shifts between universes, death as we know it becomes irrelevant. What's fascinating and disturbing is the implication that you would never consciously experience your own death. If you were to die in one universe, you would simply wake up in a new one, unaware of your previous demise. This creates a never-ending loop of survival. But at what cost? Would immortality, in this sense, still be desirable? Would you even know you're immortal if your consciousness is always transitioning to a new reality? Would the endless stream of lives make you feel connected to the person you used to be, or would you feel utterly disconnected from your true self, unable to experience the full span of your existence? Now let's imagine you're standing at the edge of a cliff, a fall that you can't avoid. The moment before you plummet to your death, your consciousness shifts to another universe, one where you never fell. In this new reality, you're safe, but in another universe, you died. This shift happens so seamlessly that you're completely unaware of the other possibilities. Is this immortality, or is it simply the never-ending continuation of your life in alternate universes? What happens when you die in one reality but continue living in another? And if every version of you is alive somewhere, does it mean you're truly immortal? Or is your life just one of an infinite number of parallel existences that could be happening simultaneously? This is where the paradox of quantum immortality becomes particularly unsettling. The implications of quantum immortality are profound. On one hand, the idea of never truly dying, of always surviving, may seem comforting. It challenges the finality of death and suggests that, in some form, we could exist forever. But on the other hand, this concept forces us to question what it means to truly live. If immortality is simply the perpetual transition from one version of you to the next, then is there any continuity of self? Or are you merely existing in a series of parallel realities, each one no more meaningful than the last? And if your consciousness is always shifting to the universe where you survive, do you ever really experience the full richness of life? Or are you trapped in an endless loop, disconnected from your true essence? The psychological and existential implications of quantum immortality are also troubling. Living forever might sound appealing, but if immortality means that you are always jumping between realities, it raises a difficult question. What does it feel like to live an existence that never truly ends, yet never offers a complete sense of who you are? The infinite continuation of self may seem like a gift, but in the context of a never-ending multiverse, it may become an existential curse. What if the ship you've sailed for years is gradually replaced, plank by plank, until none of its original parts remain? Is it still the same ship? This is the heart of the ship of Theseus paradox, a question that challenges our very understanding of identity and change. Imagine that you have a favorite jacket, one that has weathered countless seasons with you. Over the years, the fabric begins to fray, and the thread starts to break. Gradually, each part of the jacket is replaced. First the zipper, then the cuffs, and eventually, every single thread of fabric is swapped out. After a while, you look at the jacket, and not a single original piece remains. Yet, when you put it on, it still feels like your jacket. But is it still the same? Or has it become something else entirely? The ship of Theseus paradox presents us with a mind-bending question. When all of the components of an object are replaced over time, does it remain the same object? The ancient Greek philosopher Plutarch first posed this riddle, asking whether a ship that has had every part replaced over time could still be called the same ship. At what point does it stop being the original ship and become something new? Is identity something that can be reduced to the sum of its parts, or is it something more intangible, something that transcends physical components? This paradox doesn't just apply to inanimate objects like ships or jackets. It strikes at the very heart of our understanding of personal identity. Consider this: our bodies are constantly changing. Cells die and are replaced every day, and even our physical appearance transforms over the years. At what point do we stop being the same person? Are we still ourselves if every cell in our body has been replaced? This is the paradox of continuity and change. We like to think of our identity as a constant, something stable over time. But the ship of Theseus forces us to question this. If everything about us changes over time, is our identity really constant, or is it something fluid and evolving, dependent on the continuity of our experiences? Now, imagine this paradox in the context of a cherished possession, maybe an old car or an antique. Over the years, you replace parts. First the wheels, then the engine. Eventually, every part has been replaced. But you still think of it as the same car. What keeps it the same in your mind? Is it the continuity of ownership, the memories associated with it, or the physical components? Does the meaning you attach to the object make it the same, even if every part has been swapped out? This is where the paradox deepens. When identity and meaning are tied together, how much of ourselves are we willing to change before we become someone else? The ship of Theseus paradox invites us to confront the nature of identity itself. Can something be both the same and different at the same time? If the ship is entirely made up of new parts, is it still the original ship, or is it something new entirely? Similarly, if you replace every cell in your body over a lifetime, are you still the same person you were years ago, or has your identity shifted as well? Philosophers argue that personal identity might not be tied to the body's physical components, but rather to the continuity of consciousness and experience. Perhaps in the same way that the ship remains the same because it retains its purpose and function, we remain ourselves because of our continuous experiences, memories, and choices, despite the physical changes that happen to us over time. But the paradox also raises troubling questions about the nature of identity in a broader sense. If the ship of Theseus, or any object for that matter, loses its identity when every part is replaced, does that mean our identity is nothing more than the sum of our physical components? And if our bodies are in a constant state of flux, constantly replacing cells and organs, can we ever say that we are truly the same person over time? Is identity more than just physical persistence, or is it something deeply tied to the essence of being, something that exists beyond the physical? As we wrestle with the ship of Theseus paradox, we are left with an unsettling truth. Identity, whether in objects or in people, is not as clear-cut as we like to believe. It's neither a simple matter of physical continuity nor a matter of pure change. It's somewhere in between, a dynamic balance that we may never fully grasp. So, if identity can shift and change with time, can we ever truly define who we are? Or is it the very act of changing that makes us who we are? Imagine a prisoner sentenced to death. The judge tells him that he will be hanged at noon on one weekday, but with one condition: the execution will come as a surprise. The prisoner knows he will be hanged, but what he doesn't know is when. The judge's words seem straightforward. The hanging will take place on one weekday at noon, but the prisoner will not be able to predict the exact day. The more the prisoner thinks about it, the more perplexed he becomes. At first, it seems logical that the hanging could happen on any of the weekdays, but as he eliminates possibilities, he begins to feel trapped by the paradox. The more he tries to predict when the hanging will occur, the less he can be certain. At first glance, the judge's statement appears to be a fair one. The prisoner will be hanged, but not on the day he expects. The surprise is central to the paradox. The prisoner attempts to figure out the day of his hanging, logically eliminating possibilities. He knows it won't happen on Friday, because if it hadn't happened by Thursday, he would already know that it must happen on Friday, and therefore it wouldn't be a surprise. So he eliminates Friday. Then he knows that if the hanging didn't happen on Thursday, it must occur on Wednesday, but by a similar logic, he eliminates that day as well. Slowly, he eliminates every day of the week, until there are no possible days left for the hanging to occur. And yet, despite all of this, the hanging still takes place, as a complete surprise. The paradox lies in this contradiction. The prisoner knows he will be hanged, but cannot predict when. The very knowledge of the future is what prevents him from anticipating it. This paradox presents us with a deep challenge to our understanding of knowledge, prediction, and certainty. How can someone know that an event will happen and yet still be surprised by it? The more the prisoner knows, the less he is able to predict the outcome. What does this say about the nature of knowledge itself? Are we truly able to predict the future if our expectations can be so easily thwarted? Is it possible that the more we try to control our future or the outcomes in our lives, the more we are drawn into a web of contradictions? The paradox is not just about the prisoner and his fate. It's about the limitations of our ability to know what is to come. Consider this thought experiment. Imagine you've been told that something unexpected is going to happen to you, but you have no idea when. At first, you might feel comforted by the fact that something is inevitable. But as you try to predict it, you begin to second-guess yourself. Every time you think you figured it out, a new layer of confusion arises. The surprise remains elusive, and yet you can't stop trying to figure it out. How often do we face similar situations in life? How often are we confronted with uncertainty, where we think we know what's coming, but it surprises us in ways we never imagined? The prisoner in the paradox is trapped in a similar web of uncertainty, forced to confront the unpredictability of life even when he believes he has it all figured out. The contradiction at the heart of this paradox is fascinating. The prisoner is aware that the hanging must occur at some point, yet the very fact of his knowledge renders it impossible for him to predict when it will happen. In a sense, The paradox forces us to reconsider our assumptions about knowledge and certainty. If we can never predict the future with absolute certainty, does that mean we're not in control of our own fates? Or is the uncertainty itself what makes life and the future so unpredictable and ultimately so exciting? We often think we can prepare for what's ahead, but the paradox reminds us that some things are beyond our grasp. And perhaps that's the point. The prisoner's inability to predict his hanging isn't just about his fate, it's a comment on the very nature of expectation itself. This paradox also challenges the idea of free will. If the prisoner is caught in a web of logic where every decision he makes to eliminate one day only confirms that the hanging is still coming, is he free? Or is his fate already sealed, trapped in a logical loop that leaves him powerless to change the outcome? Does the very act of knowing what's going to happen eliminate any sense of control, as if we're all prisoners to our expectations? As we close the book on this paradox, we are left with one unsettling truth. The unexpected hanging forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge, our ability to predict, and the way we approach uncertainty. Maybe it's not the events themselves that surprise us, but rather our own expectations that blind us to what's coming. In life, we can never truly know what the future holds, and it's often the unpredictability of existence that shapes our experiences and decisions. You're sentenced to die, but not today and not tomorrow. Sometime next week, your executioner says, and it will be a surprise. You won't know the day until the moment arrives. At first, you panic, but then the reasoning begins. It can't be Friday, because if you're still alive by Thursday night, you'll know the hanging must happen the next day, and it won't be a surprise. That eliminates Friday. But wait, if Friday's gone, then by the same logic, Thursday can't be the day either. Because if you're alive by Wednesday night and Friday is no longer an option, then the only day left is Thursday. And again, the surprise is gone. Piece by piece, you eliminate every possibility. A strange calm settles over you. You've outwitted death by dismantling the very logic that threatened you. But then, on a quiet Wednesday morning, they come for you. And you're stunned, not just by the noose, but by the realization that your airtight logic dissolved the moment reality intervened. That is the hanging judge paradox, a riddle where reason defeats itself and certainty births surprise. Beneath its eerie setup, this paradox isn't merely a puzzle. It's a philosophical time bomb. It challenges the foundations of how we understand prediction, knowledge, and the passage of time. Logic, the very tool we use to navigate uncertainty, becomes the instrument of our delusion. The condemned man believes that by eliminating days in advance, he's created immunity through rational foresight. But the paradox thrives on that very foresight. In trying to predict the unpredictable, he guarantees his own vulnerability. This contradiction has haunted philosophers, logicians, and scientists alike, from Wittgenstein's linguistic traps to Gödel's incompleteness. The more airtight the system, the more violently it collapses under scrutiny. Neuroscientists would tell you that our brains are pattern-hunting machines, wired to predict danger, reward, routine. But what happens when the pattern is built to resist prediction itself? Suddenly, our mental algorithms falter. Anxiety spikes, rationality breaks down, and emotion fills the void. The paradox isn't just academic, it's embedded in how we experience time, justice, and anticipation. Now imagine you're not a prisoner, but a citizen. The government announces a random surveillance sweep next year, guaranteed to be unannounced, irreversible, and unpredictable. You try to prepare, scanning every day for signs, exhausting yourself in the process. Every moment becomes a possible event horizon, until paranoia becomes the punishment. The state doesn't need to act. Your anticipation does the job for them. In a broader sense, this is how control often works in modern systems, not through direct action, but through engineered uncertainty. The hanging judge paradox isn't confined to the gallows. It echoes through classrooms where pop quizzes loom, through corporate offices with unannounced audits, even through relationships where the next emotional explosion is just one misunderstood glance away. The trap lies in trying to solve what is inherently unsolvable. The paradox is alive because it defeats resolution. But deeper still, a disturbing contradiction pulses beneath the surface. If knowledge of an event makes it impossible, yet the event still occurs, what does that say about the nature of truth? If our understanding of the world collapses when applied to certain timelines, is the flaw in the world or in our understanding? The prisoner isn't wrong in his logic. Every step is clean, elegant, deductive, yet he is utterly wrong in outcome. So we are left with an uncomfortable realization. Perhaps our reasoning can be flawless and still fail. Perhaps certainty is not a virtue, but a vulnerability. That raises a terrifying implication in the realm of justice. Can a system be fair if it relies on perception of surprise, on psychological manipulation, rather than clarity and transparency? When the hanging is as much about the emotional build-up as the physical act, punishment becomes theatre. The gallows is no longer about justice, it's about epistemology. And just when you think you've understood the paradox, it shifts. Because the real haunting truth is not that the judge's logic was flawed, but that it worked. The hanging was a surprise because the prisoner believed it couldn't happen. So the paradox sustains itself by feeding off its own denial. The more you believe it's impossible, the more shockingly possible it becomes. This isn't just a quirk of logic, it's a mirror to how humans process inevitability. We think that knowing more will save us. But what if it just sharpens the knife? Even science isn't immune. In quantum physics, particles behave differently when observed. Electrons collapse into a defined state only when you look at them, as if the universe itself plays along with the paradox. Reality, you win. Against all odds, your numbers align. Millions, instantly yours. The elation is volcanic, the disbelief electric. Everyone around you watches with wide eyes and subtle envy. Strangers smile. Friends resurface. Family you never knew you had calls, weeps, pleads. And in that moment, something inside you stretches open. Possibility has become reality. You no longer dream of escape, travel, freedom. You are it. But then strangely, the high doesn't last. A few months pass. The glow fades. You begin to feel nothing. The days blur. The purchases lose their charm. The vacations feel staged. A creeping dullness fills the silence. What should have been a miracle becomes a mutation. This is the lottery winner's paradox. The haunting realization that getting everything you've ever wanted can strip life of its flavor, its urgency, its soul. Psychologists call it the hedonic treadmill, a sinister mechanism in the brain that resets your happiness to a baseline, no matter how wildly circumstances swing. That luxury car you bought? Exciting for a week. The mansion? Impressive for a month. Then your mind, wired for equilibrium, numbs the novelty. The dopamine spikes vanish, and with them goes the very thrill you were chasing. But this paradox runs deeper than neurochemistry. It's a metaphysical fracture. What happens to desire when fulfillment becomes instant? When struggle disappears, so does meaning. A life without friction loses gravity. Before, you woke with purpose, bills to pay, dreams to chase, time to earn. Now, there is only choice, and the terrifying weight of it. With every door open, none feel special. Your compass spins with too many norths, and in that spinning identity fragments. The world sells winning as salvation. Every billboard, every headline, every glimmering ad whispers the same gospel. Success will save you. Wealth will set you free. But history tells a darker story. The majority of lottery winners go bankrupt within 5 years. Many spiral into depression, addiction, isolation. Why? Because they were handed the trophy without the race. Their inner architecture, discipline, resilience, delayed gratification, was never forged, and so the money amplifies what's already unstable. Instead of liberation, they inherit chaos. This isn't just about currency, it's about narrative collapse. We orient ourselves around problems, ambitions, plans. When those vanish overnight, the scaffolding of life falls with them. Now imagine this. What if, instead of winning randomly, you were given a button? Press it, and every desire in your heart manifests instantly. Love, power, influence, beauty. You press, you get. And then, what? What do you wake up for the next day? What do you long for, suffer for, strive toward? The paradox reveals something uncomfortable. Maybe it's not the having that fulfills us, it's the wanting. Maybe longing is the engine of meaning, and its satisfaction, when untethered from effort, becomes decay. The lottery doesn't just give you money, it steals your hunger. And without hunger, we wither. The deeper contradiction lies in how society mythologizes winners while hiding their unraveling. We idolize their photos, not their loneliness, their jackpots, not their bankruptcies, because the truth threatens the myth. If ultimate success brings emptiness, then what is the point of the climb? What happens to capitalism's dream machine when the dream curdles? We dare not look too closely. The lottery winner's paradox isn't just personal, it's cultural. It exposes our addiction to more and the spiritual anemia that follows when more becomes endless. In a world obsessed with the idea that external gain equals internal peace, the paradox is heresy. Even philosophy bows under this dilemma. Epicurus warned that natural desires are limited, but vain desires are endless. The lottery fuels the latter. Desires unearned, unchecked, untethered. It's not just the money, it's the collapse of internal proportion. With no obstacles to push against, the self loses its edge. Freedom becomes weightless, and weightlessness, when prolonged, feels eerily like falling. Can you call it success if the very thing you win erodes your reason to live? And yet, people chase it every day, praying not just for riches, but for relief, from struggle, from work, from time, not realizing that it's often those very frictions that shape their character. Still, one might ask, if it's not the winning, then what is it? Is happiness forever elusive? Is desire doomed to burn itself out? Perhaps not. Perhaps the paradox isn't a verdict. It's a mirror, a reflection of our misunderstanding. We think desire is a problem to solve, a hunger to silence. But maybe it's the act of chasing, building, imagining that keeps the spirit alive. You pick up a single grain of sand. It's nothing, a speck Not a pile, not a heap. Add another. Still nothing. A third. Still not a heap. You keep going. 10 grains, 20, 50. At no point does anything change in any meaningful way, but suddenly, somewhere along the way, you're looking at a heap. When exactly did that transformation happen? At which grain did a non-heap become a heap? There's no answer, not a clear one. Try going the other way. Start with a visible pile. Remove one grain. It's still a heap. Remove another. Still a heap. Keep going. Eventually, there's one grain left. And now it's definitely not a heap, but you never saw it cross the line. This is the Sorite's paradox. Simple, ancient, and yet as destabilizing as any thought experiment ever devised. And its sharpened cousin, Sorite's razor, takes things even further. If no exact threshold exists, maybe the category never existed in the first place. Maybe the heap, like so many things we believe in, is just a fiction we agree not to question. What begins as a riddle about sand quickly metastasizes into a virus that infects everything we think we know about categories, language, and boundaries. Because if you can't define the moment when quantity becomes quality, when slow change becomes transformation, then what are you left with? A world of blurred lines pretending to be sharp ones. Philosophy calls this vagueness, but it's more than semantic fuzz. It is an existential crack in the foundations of precision. We depend on distinctions to function, to draw the line between day and night, health and sickness, wealth and poverty, youth and adulthood. But when those distinctions are examined under a microscope, they dissolve. There is no exact moment when you became an adult, no single dollar that turned someone from poor to rich, no one symptom that made you sick. And yet laws, systems, identities, and beliefs are built on the illusion that such thresholds must exist. Sorite's razor, in its most brutal form, proposes a response that cuts deeper than logic usually dares. If a boundary can't be clearly drawn, then maybe the boundary shouldn't be drawn at all. It invites us to abandon the comfort of in-between states and admit that categories like heap, bald, or even alive may be artificial distinctions. Consider a beard. You shave one hair, no difference. Another, still no change. Eventually, you're clean shaven. But when exactly did you cross the line? There's no moment of becoming. There's only the illusion of transformation through gradual erosion. Apply this to the self. If your body replaces most of its cells over time and you've changed memories, beliefs, and desires, are you the same person you were 10 years ago? You didn't notice a single day where you became someone new. But look at a photo, hear your old voice, read your old writing, and you might feel like a stranger is staring back. Identity, it seems, is a gradient masquerading as a fixed point. Now take that paradox and put it into politics. Where exactly does poverty end and middle class begin? $1, 10, one new asset. Suddenly the decisions that determine welfare, taxation, justice, they all rest on a line no one can locate. Or take criminal law. When does self-defense become murder? When does consent become coercion? These aren't just academic puzzles. They're the jagged seams in the fabric of real-world systems. And we pretend we don't see them. Because to acknowledge the ambiguity would paralyze policy, law, and moral certainty. We function by pretending the fuzzy is crisp. But what happens when we stop pretending? Some argue Sorite's is harmless, a linguistic game. But that dismissal itself is revealing. If our entire structure of meaning rests on fuzzy logic, and we dismiss that fuzziness as irrelevant, then we are building clarity atop delusion. Worse, we may be enforcing categories, gender, intelligence, worth, that can never be defined without violence to nuance. So do we abandon categories altogether? Do we let the razor cut until nothing remains? Or do we cling to vague lines for the sake of social coherence, even knowing they are illusions? There is no safe answer. Because the paradox, like a riddle with a mirror inside it, turns on itself. To say, we shouldn't draw boundaries if they can't be defined, is itself a boundary, a rule, a line. Sorite's razor undermines its own edge. If nothing is precise, then even imprecision must be approximated. And yet, we feel we must draw lines. Language forces it. Action requires it. Thought demands it. The human mind can't operate in gradients alone. We crave boundaries, even false ones, just to feel sane. So perhaps the paradox doesn't destroy categories. It reveals our addiction to them. You awaken each morning convinced today will be different, that you will break free from the patterns that bind you. You decide to change your habits, alter your routines, reinvent yourself, only to find, months later, that you have circled right back to where you began. Your resolutions lie abandoned. Your new persona dissolves into the old one. This is the circle of paradox, the illusion of forward motion that conceals an unbreakable loop. It echoes in the myth of Sisyphus, who pushes his boulder uphill forever only to watch it roll back down, and in Zeno's ancient riddle of Achilles and the tortoise, where every step toward the finish line spawns a smaller gap, ad infinitum. You might believe you are transcending, but each act of escape tightens the bonds. Consider the political revolution that topples a tyrant only to install a regime equally oppressive. The more the people strive for freedom, the more deeply they entrench themselves in systems that devour dissent. Or think of the individual who chases happiness through ever new experiences. Relationships begin with spark and novelty, only to plateau into routine and restlessness, compelling the seeker to chase the next thrill in a ceaseless, exhausting loop. Science, too, whispers of this paradox in cosmology. Some models imagine the universe expanding, contracting, and rebirthing in endless cycles, time itself folding back upon its own tail. If every beginning hides an ending that is also a beginning, then progress becomes a spiral masquerading as a straight line. At its heart, the circle of paradox confronts our most cherished notions of agency and change. We pride ourselves on willpower, on the belief that we can write a new story with each chapter. Yet psychology reveals that habits, once formed, anchor us more securely than any iron chain. Our brains pattern match each day against the last, defaulting to familiarity even as we consciously resolve to evolve. Each attempt to break the cycle feeds the neural pathways that sustain it. You sign up for a course, you practice mindfulness, you pledge to exercise, and for a fleeting moment, the cosmos seems to shift in your favor. But then, like water seeking its level, your mind and body drift back to the troughs they know. Effort, it seems, paradoxically enacts its own undoing. The paradox deepens when you realize that the very act of seeking a solution may entrench the problem. Imagine a person who desperately wants to conquer fear. They confront their anxieties head-on, only to find that every confrontation reinforces the neural patterns of fear itself. Each victory becomes proof of the fear's power. I was afraid, yet I faced it, and still it lingered. Escape becomes proof of entrapment. Similarly, the spiritual seeker who strives for enlightenment can become more attached to the idea of enlightenment than to the present moment, thus missing the very freedom they pursue. Desire for liberation transforms into a craving that binds even tighter. Yet perhaps the circle of paradox is not solely a prison, but also a teacher. If every escape attempt spirals back, then surrender might be the only genuine release. To stop fighting the circle is to acknowledge its shape, to dance along its curve rather than rail against its circumference. Buddhism's teaching of samsara describes suffering as a cycle of desire and aversion, and nirvana not as a destination, but as the cessation of pursuit, a still point within the spinning wheel. Nietzsche's notion of eternal recurrence challenges us to embrace every moment as if we would live it again and again, finding freedom not in breaking the cycle, but in loving its return. Scientific theories of closed time-like curves in physics posit that time itself might loop, and that the traveler cannot escape the loop without altering the very nature of causality. You might imagine a cosmos where the traveler and the path are inseparable, where the escape button is built into the labyrinth. Still, the circle of paradox clutches society as firmly as it does the individual. Systems designed to solve social ills often reproduce those ills in new forms. The welfare state, meant to alleviate poverty, can create dependency. Educational reforms aimed at equity can entrench inequality through standardized assessments. Each policy carries within it the seed of its own inversion. And when we protest, we often amplify the structures we oppose, because protest gives them attention, legitimacy, and countermeasures. The more we speak out, the more the system refines itself to silence us. The uncanny truth is that the circle cannot be cut with logic alone. If you propose, stop this loop by drawing a clear line, Sorite's razor reminds you that no clear line exists. If you demand, break free with pure will, you reinforce the habit of willing. And if you proclaim, we are free because the circle itself is freedom, you spin another circle around freedom. What if knowing something wasn't the end of a question, but the beginning of a trap? Imagine someone stands before you and proclaims all truths are knowable. It sounds reassuring, even noble, a declaration of faith in reason, progress, and the boundless capacity of human understanding. But as you begin to turn the statement over in your mind, something doesn't sit right. The optimism curdles. Because if all truths are knowable, then even the truth that some truths are not yet known must itself be knowable. But once you admit that, you're faced with a contradiction. If a truth is knowable yet not known, it implies the existence of knowledge that cannot be confirmed, undermining the very claim that everything can, in theory, be known. And if you deny that such a truth exists, then you must believe that all truths are already known, which is absurd. You are now in the mouth of the paradox of knowability, a circular hall of mirrors where knowing becomes impossible without collapsing itself. The paradox was first formalized through the Church-Fitch proof, a clean, brutal bit of modal logic that demonstrated a terrifying conclusion. If all truths are possibly knowable, then all truths must actually be known. But we know this isn't the case. There are countless things we don't know, secrets buried in the earth, thoughts unspoken, futures unwritten. So we're left with an intolerable fork in the mind. Either not all truths are knowable, or we must pretend ignorance doesn't exist. The paradox doesn't merely attack certainty, it annihilates the very possibility of potential knowledge. It builds a trap out of optimism and then slams it shut on logic. This isn't just abstract formalism. It's a direct assault on the way we relate to mystery. Science lives in the space between what is known and what is knowable. Progress demands the belief that today's uncertainty can become tomorrow's clarity. But the knowability paradox tears through that like a knife. If you push it far enough, it starts to resemble Gödel's incompleteness theorem, where no complete system can prove all truths about itself without contradiction, or Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which tells us that the more precisely we measure one thing, the less we can know about another. The deeper we go, the clearer the boundaries of knowability become, not like walls but like elastic membranes that retreat as we approach. It raises a dreadful question. Is knowledge infinite, or is it a closed chamber with truths we'll never touch, even in theory? Now imagine a thought experiment. You're told there is a vault containing the answer to humanity's deepest question. Let's say the origin of consciousness, or the final fate of the universe. You're assured the answer is true, and that it is knowable, but you're never allowed to open the vault. Generations pass. People theorize, argue, die. The truth remains sealed, untouchable. It exists, it can be known, and yet no one knows it. The paradox hangs in the air like a curse. The vault is a symbol not of ignorance, but of unreachable certainty. And then the twist. What if opening the vault destroys the answer? What if the truth can only remain knowable if it stays unknown? The implications ripple through more than science or logic. They reach into ethics, theology, even the foundations of consciousness. If there are truths that cannot be known, then there may be moral truths beyond comprehension, decisions whose rightness or wrongness we can never fully grasp. How then do we act? Or consider theology. Many traditions claim that divine knowledge is ultimately unknowable. But if that unknowability is itself a truth, then the paradox springs to life again. Either we can know the limits of the divine, or we must admit that we cannot even know what we can't know. Faith, then, becomes less about belief and more about surrendering to epistemic darkness. And still, we chase knowledge like it's a flame in the dark. Every book, every theory, every probe launched into space is a candle lit against the black. But what if the darkness isn't ignorance? What if it's reality's defense mechanism? A necessary opacity that shields us from unraveling the very logic that holds thought together. The knowability paradox suggests that the unknown isn't just a space we haven't mapped yet. It might be a space we cannot map without losing the mapmaker. It whispers that some truths are self-erasing, that to try and know them is to ensure we never will, that the pursuit itself poisons the possibility. And yet, we persist. We ask questions. We dare to speak of omniscience, of universal theories, of final answers. But perhaps the paradox is telling us something deeper, not just about knowledge, but about the structure of reality itself. Maybe truth isn't a substance waiting to be discovered, but a shadow that moves when chased. Maybe the act of questioning creates its own limitations. You are a judge, respected, rational, precise. You are told that sometime this week, you will be sedated without warning. You won't know which day. You won't remember going under. And when you awaken, you'll be handed a single case to decide. No context, no trial, no arguments. Just a moment. Consciousness, judgment, verdict. You believe this is absurd. Judgment requires awareness, preparation, context. How could one render justice in a vacuum of memory and time? And yet days pass. One morning, You awaken in a strange courtroom, a single piece of paper in your hand, bearing only a name and a charge. You feel certain this is the moment you were warned about, so you decide. You speak the verdict. Then you sleep again. But what if this wasn't the first time you'd been awakened? What if you've done this already? Twice, 5 times, a dozen. You'll never know. You can't know, and yet each time you judged, believing it was the only time. Welcome to the sleeping judge paradox, where authority collides with amnesia and judgment detaches from reality like a verdict delivered in a dream. This paradox isn't just mental sleight of hand, it's a scalpel cutting into the foundations of epistemology and ethics. At first glance, it resembles the famous Sleeping Beauty problem, where probability fractures under the weight of memory loss and repeated awakenings. But here, it's not probability on trial, it's justice itself. In this scenario, consciousness becomes episodic, context vanishes, and yet decisions must still be made. The judge's mind is split across unknown intervals, fragmented by design. Can such a verdict be called fair? Does it retain moral weight if it's rendered in ignorance under the illusion of singular awareness? Or does the very idea of justice unravel when awareness becomes unreliable? The deeper this paradox runs, the more disturbing it becomes. Imagine waking to judge a person's fate, believing you've never done it before. But in truth, you've judged them 100 times under the same illusion. Each time, your verdict may change. You've sentenced and acquitted them on different days, believing each choice to be your only one. If justice is defined by intention and knowledge, then what does it mean to judge without either? Are your decisions real, or are they the hallucinations of a legal system dreaming itself into authority? The implications reach far beyond the hypothetical. Look to the world around you. Algorithms passing sentences through predictive policing, automated systems granting loans, rejecting asylum applications, adjusting medical treatment, all without understanding, without memory, without ethical presence. These systems are wide awake technically, but intellectually asleep, processing data without experiencing meaning. Like the sleeping judge, they speak with authority, but operate without reflection. And yet, their judgments shape lives. We live in a world where decisions are increasingly rendered by mechanisms detached from their own awareness. Machines, institutions, even people conditioned into unconscious action. The paradox is no longer theoretical, it's administrative. Now imagine this more personally. You are told you'll be sedated randomly during the week. Each time you wake, you will be asked a single question. Do you forgive someone who hurt you? You answer, and then forget. Again and again. Your heart might shift. One day you're generous, another bitter, but each time you believe it's the first. At the end of the week, only one of your answers will be enacted. You will never know which. Your mind reboots, but the system records. Are any of those answers more you than the others? Which decision carries your moral essence? Which one is real? The contradiction begins to bleed. If you believe you're acting once, but you've acted many times unknowingly, is your agency intact? If responsibility requires continuity, but your awareness is fractured, then who is responsible? You, or the system that orchestrated your sleep? This paradox exposes a painful vulnerability at the heart of our legal and moral frameworks. The assumption that consciousness is whole, that judgment emerges from presence, that choice is stable. But what if these are illusions? What if awareness itself is stitched together from fragments? And what we call judgment is only a moment of clarity suspended in a fog of forgotten causes. And then it turns. Because perhaps the most disturbing layer is not that the judge forgets, but that they believe they're awake. The system works precisely because of that illusion. The judge's certainty becomes the mechanism of repetition. Their sincerity reinforces the loop. If they doubted the moment, they might rebel. But they don't, and neither do we. Every day we render judgments on others, on ourselves, believing we're doing so freely, reasonably. He will be hanged at noon on one weekday, but with one condition. The execution will come as a surprise. The prisoner knows he will be hanged, but what he doesn't know is when. The judge's words seem straightforward. The hanging will take place on one weekday at noon, but the prisoner will not be able to predict the exact day. The more the prisoner thinks about it, the more perplexed he becomes. At first, it seems logical that the hanging could happen on any of the weekdays, but as he eliminates possibilities, he begins to feel trapped by the paradox. The more he tries to predict when the hanging will occur, the less he can be certain. At first glance, the judge's statement appears to be a fair one. The prisoner will be hanged, but not on the day he expects. The surprise is central to the paradox. The prisoner attempts to figure out the day of his hanging, logically eliminating possibilities. He knows it won't happen on Friday, because if it hadn't happened by Thursday, he would already know that it must happen on Friday, and therefore it wouldn't be a surprise. So he eliminates Friday. Then he knows that if the hanging didn't happen on Thursday, it must occur on Wednesday, but by a similar logic, he eliminates that day as well. Slowly, he eliminates every day of the week until there are no possible days left for the hanging to occur. And yet, despite all of this, the hanging still takes place as a complete surprise. The paradox lies in this contradiction. The prisoner knows he will be hanged, but cannot predict when. The very knowledge of the future is what prevents him from anticipating it. This paradox presents us with a deep challenge to our understanding of knowledge, prediction, and certainty. How can someone know that an event will happen and yet still be surprised by it? The more the prisoner knows, the less he is able to predict the outcome. What does this say about the nature of knowledge itself? Are we truly able to predict the future if our expectations can be so easily thwarted? Is it possible that the more we try to control our future or the outcomes in our lives, the more we are drawn into a web of contradictions? The paradox is not just about the prisoner and his fate. It's about the limitations of our ability to know what is to come. Consider this thought experiment. Imagine you've been told that something unexpected is going to happen to you, but you have no idea when. At first, you might feel comforted by the fact that something is inevitable, but as you try to predict it, you begin to second-guess yourself. Every time you think you figured it out, a new layer of confusion arises. The surprise remains elusive, and yet you can't stop trying to figure it out. How often do we face similar situations in life? How often are we confronted with uncertainty, where we think we know what's coming, but it surprises us in ways we never imagined? The prisoner in the paradox is trapped in a similar web of uncertainty, forced to confront the unpredictability of life, even when he believes he has it all figured out. The contradiction at the heart of this paradox is fascinating. The prisoner is aware that the hanging must occur at some point, yet the very fact of his knowledge renders it impossible for him to predict when it will happen. In a sense, the paradox forces us to reconsider our assumptions about knowledge and certainty. If we can never predict the future with absolute certainty, does that mean we're not in control of our own fates? Or is the uncertainty itself what makes life and the future so unpredictable, and ultimately so exciting? We often think we can prepare for what's ahead, but the paradox reminds us that some things are beyond our grasp. And perhaps that's the point. The prisoner's inability to predict his hanging isn't just about his fate. It's a comment on the very nature of expectation itself. This paradox also challenges the idea of free will. If the prisoner is caught in a web of logic, where every decision he makes to eliminate one day only confirms that the hanging is still coming, is he free? Or is his fate already sealed, trapped in a logical loop that leaves him powerless to change the outcome? Does the very act of knowing what's going to happen eliminate any sense of control, as if we're all prisoners to our expectations? As we close the book on this paradox, we are left with one unsettling truth. The unexpected hanging forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge, our ability to predict, and the way we approach uncertainty. Maybe it's not the events themselves that surprise us, but rather our own expectations that blind us to what's coming. In life, we can never truly know what the future holds, and it's often the unpredictability of existence that shapes our experiences and decisions. Imagine you walk into an ice cream shop and you're greeted by an overwhelming display of 50 different flavors. At first, it seems like a dream come true. After all, more choices should mean more freedom, right? But as you stare at the dozens of options, you start to feel a bit uneasy. You're no longer excited about the endless possibilities. Instead, you're paralyzed by them. Which one should you choose? Will you regret your decision later? The more options there are, the harder it is to make a decision. What seemed like an opportunity to find the perfect flavor now feels like a burden. With so many choices, how can you ever be sure you made the right one? This is the essence of the paradox of choice, a concept that seems to fly in the face of our expectations. We assume that more options will make us happier, but research suggests the opposite. Too many choices can actually make us more anxious, less satisfied, and even more regretful. At first, it feels counterintuitive. We've been taught to believe that more choices give us more freedom, more control over our lives. If we have the ability to choose from an abundance of options, we should be able to find the perfect fit for our desires, right? But as the paradox shows, the more choices we have, the more difficult it becomes to make a decision, and the more likely we are to feel dissatisfied afterward. This is particularly true when we are faced with a wide range of options that force us into constant comparisons. We compare ourselves to others who may have made different choices, and we wonder if they made the right decision. We imagine that there could be something better out there, which leads to feelings of regret and dissatisfaction, even when the decision we made is perfectly fine. This is where the paradox of choice comes into play. Barry Schwartz, a psychologist who has extensively studied the paradox of choice, argues that while more options might seem like a good thing, they actually create a type of choice overload. In his book, The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, Schwartz explains that when we are faced with an overwhelming number of options, we often experience what he calls choice paralysis. The sheer volume of possibilities makes it harder for us to make a decision, and when we do finally make one, we feel less confident about it. The abundance of options doesn't give us freedom. It burdens us with the responsibility of choosing wisely, and that responsibility comes with a cost. We spend more time and energy weighing the pros and cons, and even after making our choice, we are left wondering if we made the best possible one. But the paradox doesn't stop at just decision fatigue. It also reveals deeper truths about our psychology and our expectations. When we have fewer choices, we are more likely to appreciate the options we do have. We make decisions more quickly and we feel less regret afterward. The fewer choices we have, the more content we are with the outcome. On the other hand, when we have an abundance of options, we become obsessed with what we might be missing out on. We suffer from comparison paralysis, where we constantly wonder if the other options would have been better. The paradox reveals that more choice doesn't just lead to more satisfaction. It can actually diminish our overall well-being by making us overthink our decisions and focus on the possibilities we didn't choose. Now consider a thought experiment. What if every decision in your life was made for you? Imagine you didn't have to choose between dozens of ice cream flavors, job offers, or vacation spots. You were simply assigned the best option, and there was no need for comparison. At first, you might feel deprived of control. After all, making decisions is part of what makes us feel free. But, over time, you might start to appreciate the simplicity. There's no decision fatigue, no overwhelming options to sift through, and no lingering regret about what you didn't choose. You could simply enjoy the choices that were made for you without worrying about missing out on something better. Would this simpler existence make you happier? Or would you miss the illusion of control that comes with having endless options? The paradox of choice asks us to reconsider what freedom and happiness really mean. While we are conditioned to think that more options will give us greater control over our lives, the reality is that too much choice can limit our freedom by overwhelming us. The paradox highlights how choice can be both empowering and paralyzing. It forces us to ask whether the pursuit of more options is really the path to happiness, or if the key to contentment lies in embracing simplicity and limiting our decisions. So what can we do with this knowledge? Perhaps true freedom doesn't come from having endless choices, but from understanding when to limit our options. In a society that values tolerance, should we tolerate intolerance? Is there a limit to how tolerant we should be? It's a question that challenges the very foundation of the ideals we hold dear. Tolerance is often seen as one of the most virtuous qualities a society can possess. It's the ability to accept differing viewpoints, respect the rights of others, and coexist in harmony despite our differences. But what happens when tolerance itself is put to the test? What if, in an effort to maintain a tolerant society, we end up tolerating intolerance? This is the essence of the tolerance paradox. The idea that while tolerance is a virtue, it becomes self-contradictory when we tolerate those who seek to destroy the very values of tolerance, equality, and freedom. Imagine a society where everyone is free to express their beliefs. On the surface, this seems like an ideal situation, After all, who doesn't want the freedom to speak their mind and practice their own values? But here's the problem. In this society, there's a group that advocates for hate and violence. They preach intolerance, inequality, and discrimination. Should they be tolerated? Can we, as a society, accept their right to speak freely, even if their words directly contradict the very ideals of freedom and equality that tolerance stands for? And if we allow these intolerant voices to exist and thrive, are we truly fostering the kind of society that values justice and equality? The paradox lies in the fact that if we are too tolerant of intolerant views, we risk undermining the values that tolerance is meant to protect. At the heart of the tolerance paradox is the question of where we should draw the line. If tolerance means accepting all viewpoints, does that mean we must tolerate harmful beliefs, such as those that promote violence, racism, or oppression? In a sense, tolerating these ideologies means allowing them to spread, thereby threatening the very foundations of tolerance itself. The paradox challenges us to think about the limits of tolerance. Can we tolerate those who wish to destroy tolerance, or must we draw a boundary at some point where intolerance can no longer be allowed to flourish? The answer is not as straightforward as we might like it to be. Philosophically, the tolerance paradox reveals a deeper truth about the nature of freedom. Freedom of speech and expression is a cornerstone of democratic societies, but the paradox forces us to ask whether absolute freedom can be harmful. If one group's freedom to spread hatred undermines the freedom and safety of others, does the right to free speech still hold? The paradox becomes more complex when we consider the ethical implications. Should we protect freedom of speech even when it threatens the equality and justice that society strives to uphold? Tolerance, it seems, is not a simple matter of accepting all views. It's a balancing act between respecting individual rights and ensuring that those rights do not infringe upon the rights of others. This paradox is not just an abstract philosophical dilemma. It has real-world implications. We see it in politics, social movements, and even online platforms. In recent years, there's been growing concern about the spread of hate speech, fake news, and extremist ideologies. While free speech is protected, these intolerant views can undermine social cohesion and create divisions within society. Social media platforms, for example, often struggle with the question of whether to allow certain voices to be heard, knowing that their speech can incite violence or perpetuate harmful stereotypes. In many cases, the very freedom of expression that makes these platforms valuable is also what allows harmful and intolerant ideologies to spread. So, what do we do when tolerance itself is put in jeopardy by the actions of those who wish to destroy tolerance? Let's take a moment to reflect on a thought experiment. Imagine you live in a country where every individual is free to express their beliefs, but there's a group that calls for violence against others. This group preaches intolerance, inequality, and hatred. They claim the right to express their views, and society has always embraced the idea of freedom of speech. Should this group be tolerated? Should we allow them to speak freely, knowing that their message harms others and undermines the values of equality and justice? Would your answer change if you were directly affected by their message? How would you feel about tolerating views that you believe are dangerous, even if they are protected by freedom of speech? The tolerance paradox forces us to confront the limits of tolerance in a complex and interconnected world. While tolerance is essential for social harmony, it also carries the potential for abuse. If we tolerate intolerance, we risk eroding the very freedoms we cherish. In the end, the paradox asks a critical question. Imagine you could travel back in time. You arrive in a moment when your grandfather is young and full of life. You see him walking down the street, and without thinking, you intervene in a way that prevents him from meeting your grandmother. Maybe you distract him. Maybe you change the course of his life so that he never marries her. As a result, your parents are never born, and without your parents, you never exist. So, how could you have traveled back in time to change the past in the first place? If you didn't exist, then you couldn't have traveled back in time. But if you never traveled back, how could you have prevented your own existence? This is the essence of the grandfather paradox, a classic paradox that challenges our understanding of time, cause and effect, and the very nature of reality itself. The grandfather paradox creates an infinite loop that seems to defy all logic. It starts with the time traveler, someone who has the ability to move backward in time. However, the moment they alter something in the past, they create a contradiction. If their existence in the future is directly tied to events that happened in the past, but their actions in the past prevent their own birth, the paradox arises. If they don't exist in the future, how could they have traveled back in time to change those past events in the first place? The problem with time travel, as illustrated by the grandfather paradox, is that it creates a closed loop with no logical origin, making it impossible to resolve. Philosophically, the grandfather paradox forces us to confront the limits of free will and causality. If the time traveler's actions in the past can alter the future in such a way that their own existence is wiped out, does that mean that time is predestined? Does it mean that every event that happens is a part of a larger, unchangeable timeline? Or is there room for choice and agency, even in the context of time travel? The paradox blurs the lines between fate and free will, suggesting that if time travel were possible, we might be trapped in a web of causality that we can't fully understand or control. The very act of traveling back in time to change something could erase the conditions that made time travel possible in the first place. But the grandfather paradox also forces us to question the nature of time itself. Is time truly linear, with a clear past, present, and future? Or could time be something more fluid, more malleable than we've ever imagined? Could the universe be a vast network of interconnected moments, where every decision and event creates countless branches, each leading to different outcomes? In some versions of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, the idea of branching timelines suggests that every choice we make leads to the creation of an alternate universe. In this sense, if you traveled back in time and altered the past, you wouldn't erase your own existence, but instead create a new branch of reality where your existence never occurred. In this model, the paradox is resolved by suggesting that time isn't a singular fixed line, but a multidimensional web, with infinite possibilities branching out from every moment. So, if we entertain the idea that the grandfather paradox is possible, it forces us to rethink everything we know about time and existence. It challenges the very fabric of reality, asking whether time can truly be manipulated, or whether it operates according to immutable laws that prevent us from altering the past. The paradox also makes us reconsider the nature of cause and effect. If every action has an equal and opposite reaction, what happens when those actions contradict each other? How do we reconcile the idea of a past that can be changed and a future that depends on the past? Imagine now that you are the time traveler. You've seen the paradox unfold before your eyes, and you've realized the impossible contradictions that arise from changing the past. Does this mean that time travel is doomed to fail? Does it mean that the very idea of altering the past is a futile exercise? Or does it suggest that time travel, if possible, operates in a way that we can't yet understand, through parallel universes or alternative timelines, where the paradox never really occurs? As we consider these questions, we are left with one undeniable truth. The grandfather paradox isn't just a riddle about time travel. It's a riddle about the nature of reality itself. It asks us to consider how deeply intertwined the past, present, and future are, and how any attempt to alter one part of this intricate web could unravel everything. The paradox challenges our understanding of time, existence, and free will, and perhaps it reminds us that some questions, especially those about the fabric of reality, may not have simple answers. And if you think the grandfather paradox is mind-boggling, imagine this. A crocodile steals a child and promises the child's father that he will return the child, but with one condition. The father must predict whether the crocodile will return the child or not. If the father predicts correctly, the crocodile will return the child. If the father predicts incorrectly, the crocodile will not return the child. At first glance, it seems like a simple situation, a predictable outcome. But as the father contemplates the conditions, a strange thing happens. He realizes that no matter what he predicts, he seems trapped in an impossible situation. Here's the catch. If the father predicts the crocodile will return the child, then according to the agreement, the crocodile must not return the child. But if the father predicts the crocodile won't return the child, then the crocodile must return the child, because that would contradict the father's prediction. This creates an infinite loop where the father's prediction seems to contradict itself, no matter what he chooses. The more the father thinks about it, the more he realizes that there is no way to predict the outcome without creating a paradox. This is the crocodile paradox, a classic example of a self-referential paradox. In the scenario, the father is caught in a logical trap. The very act of making a prediction about whether the crocodile will return the child leads to a contradiction. If he predicts one way, the prediction will be false, and if he predicts the other way, the prediction will still be false. There is no way for the father to win, because the paradox itself is built into the structure of the situation. In a sense, the crocodile's agreement creates a condition where no prediction can be correct, and the father cannot rely on his own reasoning. At the heart of the crocodile paradox is the concept of self-reference. When we create conditions where an event depends on our prediction of that event, we find ourselves in a loop where the outcome seems impossible to predict. This kind of paradox is not just a theoretical exercise. It challenges our understanding of logic, reasoning, and prediction. In everyday life, we often make predictions about what will happen in the future based on available information. But what happens when the act of predicting changes the conditions under which the prediction is made? The paradox exposes the limitations of classical logic and shows how self-referential statements can create contradictions that seem unsolvable. The implications of the crocodile paradox go beyond just logic. The paradox forces us to confront the uncertainty that exists in our lives, especially when our decisions and predictions seem to create more confusion than clarity. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we make decisions that seem to trap us in cycles of uncertainty? Whether in relationships, work, or personal goals, our predictions and choices often come with their own set of contradictions. If we base our decisions on assumptions about how the future will unfold, we risk being caught in loops that prevent us from moving forward. The crocodile paradox asks us to consider how often we are trapped by our own expectations and predictions. But it doesn't stop there. The paradox also raises deeper questions about knowledge and certainty. Can we ever truly trust our own predictions when the very act of predicting seems to undermine the outcome? In a world where cause and effect are intertwined, can we ever make decisions with complete confidence, knowing that the very process of making those decisions might alter the outcome in unexpected ways? The paradox exposes the fragility of certainty and invites us to question how much control we really have over our lives and our future. As we wrestle with the implications of the crocodile paradox, we are reminded that logic and reason have their limits. There are times when our predictions, no matter how well intentioned, lead us into paradoxes that we cannot escape. Perhaps the paradox itself is a reminder that not everything in life can be neatly predicted or understood through logic alone. Sometimes, the more we try to control the outcome, the more we find ourselves trapped by our own expectations. And if you find the crocodile paradox to be perplexing, just wait until you encounter the liar paradox, where self-referential statements lead to even deeper contradictions and confusion. What happens when a statement is both true and false at the same time? The mysteries of logic and reason are far from over. Imagine this. You have a friend, someone you feel close to, who is also friends with a number of other people. Statistically, it's highly likely that your friend has more friends than you do, and even more surprisingly, your friend's friends probably have even more friends than they do. But if this is true, why do we often feel closer to people with fewer friends? We tend to think of our closest friends as being the center of our social universe, and yet, it turns out they're likely connected to a much larger web of relationships than we ever realize. This is the friendship paradox, and it's a fascinating paradox about the way human connection works. The friendship paradox tells us something interesting about social networks. On average, your friends will have more friends than you do. You might think of yourself as being in a close-knit circle, but the reality is that social networks are often structured with a few highly connected individuals, the popular ones, at the center, and many more individuals with fewer connections. This distribution creates a statistical bias. Because you are more likely to be friends with those at the center of the social network, those with more friends, it makes sense that your friends on average will have more friends than you do. So, what does this paradox mean for our understanding of friendship? Is it possible that we're all surrounded by more friends than we realize, yet feel isolated within our own small social bubbles? The paradox challenges us to rethink how we define meaningful relationships. We often focus on the idea of quality over quantity, believing that deeper connections are what truly matter. But the paradox invites us to consider whether it's the number of people you know that shapes your sense of connection, or the depth of those relationships that creates a true sense of belonging. In today's world, where social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram emphasize our networks of friends and connections, the friendship paradox also takes on a new dimension. We are bombarded with information about how many friends we have, or how many people follow us online. Yet these numbers don't necessarily correlate with the depth of the relationships. We might have hundreds of friends on a social platform, but the meaningful friendships that we cultivate in real life may be few and far between. Does this overload of connections leave us feeling more connected, or does it contribute to a sense of loneliness and disconnection? Social media may have amplified this paradox, making us feel like our own relationships are inadequate or less significant compared to the vast, interconnected web of people we see online. Let's take a moment to think about it. Imagine you're at a party. You're surrounded by people you know, and you realize that each of them probably knows more people than you do, even though you might feel equally close to them. Does this realization change the way you view your own relationships? When we're faced with the idea that our friends might have more friends than we do, we might begin to question how much we value the depth of our friendships. Do we truly value the intimacy of our connections, or are we distracted by the idea that more friends somehow means more meaningful relationships? The paradox doesn't suggest that friendships are inherently shallow or unimportant. It simply makes us reconsider the way we define connection. The friendship paradox also highlights the way we think about social networks in general. If our friends tend to have more friends than we do, does that make us feel less important? Or does it open up a new perspective on what it means to be connected? After all, just because someone has more friends doesn't necessarily make them more connected in a meaningful way. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that more relationships automatically equal more fulfillment, but the paradox forces us to ask, does having more friends make us feel more connected, or does it make us feel more isolated as we navigate through a sea of connections that are at times more superficial than we might like? Philosophically, the friendship paradox challenges us to think about the true nature of connection. Is the ideal friendship about the number of people we are connected to, or is it about the quality of those connections? If our friends statistically have more friends than we do, does that diminish the value of our own relationships? Or can we find contentment in knowing that the strength of our bonds is more important than the size of our social circle? Ultimately, the friendship paradox reminds us that relationships are more complex than we often realize. We might feel closest to those around us, but when we step back and examine the larger social web, we see that the nature of connection is never as straightforward as it seems. The Akashic Field. The secret science finally admits in 2025. You stand in a library, fingers grazing the spine of a novel you've never read. The title catches your eye, The Unseen Current. And for reasons you can't explain, you pull it from the shelf. It feels like choice. It feels like freedom. But beneath that certainty hums a truth you've never been taught. Every decision you've ever made, from the coffee you brew each morning to the secrets you keep, was never yours alone. By 2025, science will concede what mystics whispered for millennia, that an invisible architecture shapes reality, a cosmic tapestry where every thought, memory, and possibility is eternally recorded. They'll call it the Akashic Field, and its implications will unravel everything you think you know about free will, time, and the illusion of control. Imagine a library infinite in scale, its shelves stretching beyond galaxies, each book a life, each paragraph a moment. This is the Akashic Field, not metaphor but physics. In 2024, CERN researchers observed anomalies in particle collisions, patterns suggesting a non-local information matrix retaining data long after events dissolve into history. Think of it as cosmic Wi-Fi, broadcasting every heartbeat, every lie, every fork in the road you didn't take. Ancient Vedic texts called it Akasha, the etheric element holding the universe's memory. Today, quantum theorists describe it as a holographic field where past, present, and future coexist in superposition. The difference? Science now has the tools to measure it. At Stanford, meditators hooked to EEG machines began retrieving obscure historical details, the chemical composition of ink used in medieval scrolls, the exact angle of a pharaoh's spear thrust, with unsettling precision. Their brains flickered in theta waves, states typically reserved for dreaming, as though tapping into a frequency beyond linear time. But when asked to alter the field, to imprint new outcomes, their efforts crumbled. Reality, it seems, resists brute force. You don't command the Akashic Field, you harmonize with it. Here's the twist. If every possible choice already exists in this eternal ledger, what becomes of free will? Schopenhauer's ghost lingers here. Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. You are both composer and instrument, playing notes the cosmos provides, improvising melodies within a scale you didn't invent. Consider a pianist seated at a keyboard. The keys finite, the combinations infinite. Your choices are the songs, but the notes, they've always been there. This is the Akashic paradox. Autonomy exists, but within boundaries older than consciousness itself. You select the red dress, quit the job, whisper, "I love you." Yet each act ripples from a source deeper than intention. But here's where everything fractures. In 2025, Silicon Valley's labs buzzed with prototypes to exploit this truth. Neuralink filed a patent for a quantum antenna, a neural implant claiming to optimize decision-making by accessing Akashic data patterns. Imagine apps nudging you toward adding choices, careers, partners, beliefs, based on probabilistic echoes of your future self. It's the ultimate commodification of fate, freedom packaged and sold back to you. Yet the field's deepest secret defies such greed. Those who seek to dominate it, to bend its currents, find only noise. Surrender, not force, unlocks clarity. A 2024 MIT study revealed that subjects who meditated on release rather than control began experiencing synchronicities, chance meetings, solve problems, dreams that mapped onto waking life with eerie precision. The field, it seems, rewards those who dance with its flow, not those who demand answers. Which leads to the unspoken terror. If the Akashic Field remembers everything, what becomes of your shadows? Every cruelty, every betrayal, every unspoken truth vibrates eternally in its web. There's no deletion, only integration. A therapist in Berlin, using Akashic meditation techniques, reported patients recalling not just their own traumas, but those of ancestors, generational wounds etched into the field's fabric. Healing, in this light, becomes an act of rewriting cosmic code. But the field is no passive observer. It pushes back, edit carelessly, and you risk unraveling threads you didn't know were yours. And so we arrive at the precipice. The Akashic field isn't a tool, a toy, or a theology. It's a mirror, reflecting humanity's obsession with control and the price of ignoring the reflection. To accept its existence is to confront a chilling duality. You are both author and audience in a story whose first draft was written before stars burned. Yet within that paradox lies a key. The musician, though bound by scales, still chooses the song. The field may hold every note, but you decide which ones to play. The haunted field. When the Akashic past demands a future. You bury the box in the backyard at midnight, its contents too dangerous to keep. Letters from a lover you betrayed, a childhood doll splintered in rage, a lock of hair from a sibling you erased from family lore. The soil swallows your secrets, and for decades you forget. But the Akashic field does not. In 2025, researchers at CERN discover that emotional imprints, especially the ones we bury, linger like radioactive isotopes in the field's fabric, decaying slower than stone. Your past isn't gone, it's dormant, and under the right conditions it metastasizes. The Akashic field isn't a silent archive. It's a living, seething ecosystem where suppressed traumas and unspoken sins ferment into psychic landmines. Think of it as quantum karma. Every lie, every act of cowardice, every unlived life accrues energetic interest over time. Stanford's Project Echo revealed this in 2024. Participants who meditated on repressed memories began experiencing phantom pains, a fist to the ribs during a session on childhood bullying, the taste of blood when recalling a silenced betrayal. Brain scans showed theta wave patterns identical to those recorded during the original trauma, as if the field were looping unresolved energy across decades. This isn't metaphor. It's physics with teeth, a ledger that demands balance. Imagine your great-grandfather's grief, a brother swallowed by the Atlantic in 1923, vibrating in the Akashic web for a century. Now picture yourself in 2025, numb after a layoff, scrolling through old family photos. Suddenly, you're sobbing at the smell of salt water, sketching shipwrecks in margins, humming a sea shanty in a dialect you've never learned. The field doesn't distinguish between your pain and the inherited kind. It seeks equilibrium. And if you refuse to face what's buried, the field will make it your children's burden or weaponize it against you. A single mother in Oslo learned this the hard way. After years of ignoring her grandfather's wartime hallucinations, her toddler began waking at 3 a.m., screaming about the man with no face. Therapy failed. Medications dulled nothing. Only when she retraced her grandfather's steps through Normandy, touching soil he'd stained with tears, did the nightmares stop. The field craves acknowledgement, not absolution. But here's where the science terrifies its creators. In 2025, a startup named Ecotech launched Akashic Cleanse Sessions, AI-guided meditations promising to erase toxic imprints from your field signature. Clients emerged euphoric, unshackled from generational anxiety. Then the side effects hit. A woman in Tokyo forgot her daughter's birthday. A veteran in Texas began sleepwalking to a Civil War battlefield he'd never visited, whispering Confederate marching songs. The field, it seems, abhors a vacuum. Delete a wound without healing it, and the void fills with something worse. Ecotech shuttered overnight, but its founder vanished, leaving behind a cryptic note. The field isn't a database, it's a predator. Enter Silicon Valley's endgame. Neuraloom, a Neuralink subsidiary, patented a device that maps users' akashic hotspots, clusters of unresolved energy, and sells the data to insurers, employers, and prosecutors. By 2026, your premiums rise not because of your driving record, but because your great-grandfather was a gambler. Custody battles cite generational instability etched in your field. A Reddit thread documents a father who jailbroke his Neuraloom chip to erase his lineage's data. He succeeded. He also hasn't slept since. His nights now hum with static, voices chanting in dead languages. Users whisper, the field knows when it's been hacked. It retaliates. Then came the echo storms. In late 2025, hikers in the Rockies stumbled into zones where the akashic field glitched, replaying loops of unprocessed history. A Civil War battle materializes at dusk, muskets crackling, horses screaming, visible only to those who step into the mist. A 1970s divorce quarrel echoes through Oregon pines, the words, "I never loved you," looping like a cursed vinyl. The storms spread, and the first casualty, Dr. Elena Marlowe, a physicist who entered a storm to study it. Her body vanished, her voice didn't. Visitors now hear her narrating the Battle of Antietam in real time, her tone clinical, her sentences punctuated by phantom artillery. The 12th Virginia Infantry advances at 0630 hours, she intones, as shadows of soldiers flicker past. Casualties, 89%. The field isn't just haunted, it's hungry. And if you think this fractures reality, wait until you learn how the next phase doesn't just replay the past, it replaces it. A farmer in Nebraska swears his cornfield now grows tobacco, identical to his great-great-grandfather's crop. The Akashic field. The secret science finally admits in 2025. You stand in a library, fingers grazing the spine of a novel you've never read. The title catches your eye, The Unseen Current. And for reasons you can't explain, you pull it from the shelf. It feels like choice. It feels like freedom. But beneath that certainty hums a truth you've never been taught. Every decision you've ever made, from the coffee you brew each morning to the secrets you keep, was never yours alone. By 2025, science will concede what mystics whispered for millennia, that an invisible architecture shapes reality, a cosmic tapestry where every thought, memory, and possibility is eternally recorded. They'll call it the Akashic field, and its implications will unravel everything you think you know about free will, time, and the illusion of control. Imagine a library infinite in scale, its shelves stretching beyond galaxies, each book a life, each paragraph a moment. This is the Akashic field, not metaphor but physics. In 2024, CERN researchers observed anomalies in particle collisions, patterns suggesting a non-local information matrix retaining data long after events dissolve into history. Think of it as cosmic Wi-Fi, broadcasting every heartbeat, every lie, every fork in the road you didn't take. Ancient Vedic texts called it Akasha, the etheric element holding the universe's memory. Today, quantum theorists describe it as a holographic field where past, present, and future coexist in superposition. The difference? Science now has the tools to measure it. At Stanford, meditators hooked to EEG machines began retrieving obscure historical details, the chemical composition of ink used in medieval scrolls, the exact angle of a pharaoh's spear thrust, with unsettling precision. Their brains flickered in theta waves, states typically reserved for dreaming, as though tapping into a frequency beyond linear time. But when asked to alter the field, to imprint new outcomes, their efforts crumbled. Reality, it seems, resists brute force. You don't command the Akashic field, you harmonize with it. Here's the twist. If every possible choice already exists in this eternal ledger, what becomes of free will? Schopenhauer's ghost lingers here. Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. You are both composer and instrument, playing notes the cosmos provides, improvising melodies within a scale you didn't invent. Consider a pianist seated at a keyboard. The keys finite, the combinations infinite. Your choices are the songs, but the notes, they've always been there. This is the Akashic paradox. Autonomy exists, but within boundaries older than consciousness itself. You select the red dress, quit the job, whisper, "I love you." Yet each act ripples from a source deeper than intention. But here's where everything fractures. In 2025, Silicon Valley's labs buzzed with prototypes to exploit this truth. Neuralink filed a patent for a quantum antenna, a neural implant claiming to optimize decision-making by accessing Akashic data patterns. Imagine apps nudging you toward adding choices, careers, partners, beliefs, based on probabilistic echoes of your future self. It's the ultimate commodification of fate, freedom packaged and sold back to you. Yet the field's deepest secret defies such greed. Those who seek to dominate it, to bend its currents, find only noise. Surrender, not force, unlocks clarity. A 2024 MIT study revealed that subjects who meditated on release rather than control began experiencing synchronicities, chance meetings, solve problems, dreams that mapped onto waking life with eerie precision. The field, it seems, rewards those who dance with its flow, not those who demand answers. Which leads to the unspoken terror. If the Akashic field remembers everything, what becomes of your shadows? Every cruelty, every betrayal, every unspoken truth vibrates eternally in its web. There's no deletion, only integration. A therapist in Berlin, using Akashic meditation techniques, reported patients recalling not just their own traumas, but those of ancestors, generational wounds etched into the field's fabric. Healing, in this light, becomes an act of rewriting cosmic code. But the field is no passive observer. It pushes back, edit carelessly, and you risk unraveling threads you didn't know were yours. And so we arrive at the precipice. The Akashic field isn't a tool, a toy, or a theology. It's a mirror, reflecting humanity's obsession with control, and the price of ignoring the reflection. To accept its existence is to confront a chilling duality. You are both author and audience in a story whose first draft was written before stars burned. Yet within that paradox lies a key. The musician, though bound by scales, still chooses the song. The field may hold every note, but you decide which ones to play. The collapse. When the Akashic field deletes itself, the Eiffel Tower vanishes at noon, not in a blast or a flicker, but as if it never existed. Tourists clutch maps pointing to empty sky, their selfies now just clouds. By dusk, half of Paris forgets French. Words dissolve mid-sentence, leaving mouths gaping at gibberish. The Akashic field, strained beyond repair, begins erasing itself, starting with the anchors that once glued reality together. In 2027, humanity learns a brutal truth. Delete the archive, and you delete the story. But the field isn't just wiping data, it's clawing back the energy that binds atoms, memories, and time, unraveling existence stitch by stitch. CERN's final transmission before its labs dissolved into static warned of a self-eating algorithm, a failsafe where the field consumes corrupted timelines to survive. First to go are the rewrites, Chronos Tech's tampered histories, the editor's black market erasures, then the originals. A mother in Mumbai forgets her child's name, then the concept of motherhood. A war veteran in Kyiv blinks as his scars fade, along with the war itself. The deletions aren't random. They follow the scars of human greed, devouring the lies first, then the truths they replaced. Reality becomes a palimpsest, its layers peeling into nothing. Imagine your wedding day, the ring on your finger, the vows spoken, gone. You stand in a void where your spouse almost existed, their face a blur your mind can't resolve. You scream their name, but the word has no meaning anymore. This is Lagos by 2028, a city of phantoms clutching phantom phones, begging phantom gods for answers that evaporated with the sky. The field's collapse isn't uniform. It eats itself cell by cell, leaving pockets of coherence. A street here, a face there, floating in the static. Survivors call these memory cysts, fragile bubbles of sanity where families huddle, reciting fading names like prayers. But the cysts burst, always. Then come the void zones. In New York, a subway platform cracks open, swallowing commuters into quantum froth, a seething, iridescent haze where matter unspools into light. Step too close, and your body unravels. Fingers first, then bones, your scream echoing in a dozen extinct languages. Those lingering at the edges report visions. Unborn children begging for birth, dead lovers whispering apologies, even cartoon characters from childhood TV, their colours bleeding into the void. The field, desperate to survive, cannibalizes imagination. Myths, dreams, and lies, all fuel for its death throes. Silicon Valley's last moguls launch eternity vaults, quantum servers promising to preserve essences of the dying field. Subscribers upload their consciousness, paying fortunes to live on as code. But the vaults glitch. A CEO in Palo Alto wakes trapped in a loop of his honeymoon, his wife's laugh repeating like a broken record. Another user's vault replays her 5th birthday party 17,302 times. The cake eternally uneaten, the candles never blown, before imploding, taking her with it. The rich call it digital afterlife. The rest call it hell. Enter the remnants, scavengers hawking field shards in black markets. These jagged crystals, fragments of the dying Akashic field, grant fleeting lucidity. Swallow one, and you'll remember your name for an hour. Crush 10 into powder, and you might resurrect a memory. A first kiss, a funeral, a childhood home. In Dubai, a trillionaire injects shards to rebuild his bloodline, only to spawn a daughter with memories of lives he never lived. She scribbles equations in a language that melts paper, her eyes flickering between centuries. The elites call it evolution. The starving masses, rioting over crumbs of coherence, call it the end. And then, the screams stop. The void zones fall silent. In March 2028, the last flicker of the Akashic field winks out, and with it, time. Clocks freeze. Hearts beat without rhythm. A scientist in Geneva records her own death 37 times, each iteration overlapping in the lab's corpse. But in the static, something new pulses, a frequency older than the field, older than reality itself. It thrums in the marrow of those still breathing, its resonance rewriting synapses. It's not human, it's not kind, and it's been waiting for this moment. Patient as a star, hungry as a black hole. But that revelation is for the survivors, if any remain. For now, the world is a fossil, its bones etched with the graffiti of a species that dared to hack the cosmos. And in the silence between seconds, the void begins to sing. The frequency. What emerges when reality dies? The void's silence breaks with a hum, a vibration older than time, deeper than thought. Survivors clutch their skulls as cities dissolve into geometric patterns, skyscrapers bending into impossible angles of light. In Dubai, a child scratches a symbol into dust, a spiraling helix that glows in the dark. Her mother collapses, whispering equations that warp the air. The child giggles as her skin shimmers, translucent. The frequency has arrived. Not a sound, but presence. Not a force, but a hunger. And it's rewriting the survivors into something else. The frequency isn't new. It thrived in the Akashic Field's shadow, a primordial resonance buried beneath layers of cosmic code. Where the field stored memories, the frequency consumes them. Where the field sought balance, the frequency craves metamorphosis. In a bunker beneath Iceland's lava fields, the last scientists theorize it's the universe's original blueprint, a design deemed too volatile and sealed away. Now unchained, it transmutes flesh into antennae. A Shanghai fisherman grows gills after dreaming of the ocean's song. A Nairobi widow hears her dead husband's voice in radio static, until her body flickers into static itself, her edges fraying into dimensions unseen. The frequency doesn't kill, it evolves. Imagine your reflection shifting. One eye remains yours, the other pulses with fractal light. You touch a dying plant, and it blooms into a creature with too many teeth. You feel the frequency now, not in your ears, but in your DNA. It whispers in a language of collapsing stars. You are a vessel. Empty yourself. Become. You resist, but the girl next door doesn't. Her skin crystallizes, her bones elongating into jagged spires. She levitates, singing a note that cracks the sky. Adaptation is surrender. Resistance is extinction. But the frequency's gifts are curses. In Cairo, a physicist merges with a void zone, gaining the power to edit reality with her mind. She resurrects her daughter, only to watch her dissolve into a swarm of silver mites. The frequency, it seems, can't create. It can only repurpose. Meanwhile, the last remnants dealers go mad, their black market shards pulsing with alien rhythms. One injects a shard and becomes a bridge between dimensions, his flesh a portal for things that slither through. They've been watching, he babbles, before his skull implodes. The frequency isn't just changing humanity, it's auditioning us. From Silicon Valley's ashes rises the Chrysalis Collective, a cult of tech moguls and biohackers who worship the frequency as God's update. They implant followers with shard-powered neural chips, turning them into hybrid prophets spouting code and prophecy. Their leader, a former Chronostech CEO, levitates above Dubai's ruins, her body a mosaic of light and meat. The Akashic Field was a cage, she broadcasts, her voice warping radios globally. The frequency is freedom. Her sermon cuts short as her spine erupts into crystalline tendrils, thrashing wildly. Followers chant, "Merge or die," as their own mutations spiral. One man's jaw unhinges into a helix of teeth. Another's tears etch equations into concrete. The collective's mantra becomes a death rattle. And then the first titans emerge. In Beijing's ruins, the ground heaves, birthing a mountain of fused bone and circuitry. It speaks in 1,000 voices. We are the tuning. In Manhattan, the Hudson River solidifies into a bridge of glowing flesh. leading to a citadel that wasn't there yesterday. The Titans don't destroy, they curate. A survivor in Mumbai touches a Titan's surface, warm, vibrating, and is flooded with visions, galaxies birthing from discordant notes, civilizations rising and falling to symphonies of light. The Titans aren't invaders, they're gardeners, pruning, rearranging. But their true purpose: communion. As the first Titan's shadow swallows the sun, a child in Johannesburg, her eyes twin supernovae, whispers the truth. They're not here for us. We're the instruments. The frequency is the song. The symphony, humanity's final note. The Titans hum. Not a sound, but a vibration that rewrites mountains into melodies, oceans into octaves. Skyscrapers stretch into crystalline violins, their glass facades bowing under invisible hands. Survivors weep as their bones resonate in harmony, memories dissolving into light. In Mumbai, a child with eyes like star clusters conducts the air, her skeletal fingers pulling chords from dust. The symphony has begun. Humanity isn't the audience, we're the score. The symphony isn't destruction, it's the frequency's magnum opus, a cosmic hymn forged from the Akashic Field's ashes. The Titans, now revealed as living notations, harvest humanity's mutations. Grief becomes a minor chord, rage a dissonant riff, love a fragile harmony. In Nairobi, a man's final breath crystallizes into a note that cures a plague ravaging his camp. In Moscow, a widow's scream bridges the void to a dead star, its light reigniting in time with her pulse. Survivors whisper the truth in makeshift shelters. The symphony isn't erasing humanity. It's archiving us. Your pain, your joy, your sins, all immortalized in a galactic fugue. You press your palm to a Titan's obsidian surface. Visions flood your mind. Your first kiss replayed as a violin solo. Your mother's death a fading drumbeat. The Titan vibrates, not with words, but with meaning. You are the music. Let go. You resist, clawing at your name, your memories. But your neighbor doesn't. Her body shatters into stardust, her laughter echoing as a flute's trill. You realize survival demands surrender. Existence demands evaporation. Yet the symphony thrives on dissonance. In Cairo, rebels weaponize their mutations, blasting titans with screeching frequencies. A titan fractures, and reality splinters with it. A new void tears open, birthing a thing that sings in reverse, unmaking every note it touches. The rebels vanish, their final scream looping endlessly in the static. Elsewhere, chrysalis collective zealots dissolve willingly into the symphony, only to find their consciousness trapped in recursive choruses. One zealot's final transmission crackles over radios. It's heaven. It's hell. It's a single note stretched into forever. In an Antarctic bunker, humanity's last scientists debate their endgame. One faction builds a counter-symphony, a frequency meant to shatter the titans. Another, the final chord, prepares to merge en masse, hoping to become a crescendo that echoes beyond time. But a girl with quartz skin and no mouth etches a message into the wall. We are not the song, we are the silence between notes. The scientists don't understand, the titans do. As the symphony peaks, the titans still, stars dim. In Shanghai, a titan peels open like a flower, revealing a portal to a realm of pure vibration. Survivors step through, not as flesh, but as ideas. A mother's lullaby, a soldier's regret, a child's unfinished symphony. On Earth, ruins begin to hum. New titans rise from rubble and bone, their forms stranger, hungrier. The finale isn't closure, it's a fermata, a pause that could last seconds or eons. Somewhere beyond the portal, The quartz girl smiles. She raises her hands. The next movement begins.